Quandrix College of Numeromancy. This college was founded by the elder dragon Tanazir Quandrix. Here, the students study patterns, fractals, and symmetries underneath reality to command power over the fundamental forces of nature. It's led by the deans Cayenne and Imbraham. Cayenne, the green side of the college, believes in using mathematics to better understand the physical nature of reality. While Imbraham, the blue side, loves numbers more than people or the outdoors. He wants nothing more than to crack the mysteries of Arcavios through dauntingly complicated theories. Today we're going to be learning about how to build the very best Quandrix draft decks. Hello there YouTube and YouTubers! Today we're going to be looking at Quandrix, one of course the 5 colleges we can be playing in the Strixhaven format. We're going to be talking all about how you should specifically draft a Quandrix deck, but before we do that, we're going to get a quicker look at some of the high concepts of a Quandrix deck. First up, when you're playing a Quandrix deck, you could be making a mid-range deck. Most of the time you will. The mid-range deck you're building will be very creature-based. Much of your damage will come from creatures. And the way to interact with your opponent is mostly through fighting. Of course, all of the fighting cards are green, and there are quite a few different variations you could have in your deck. And then furthermore, your deck will be using Magecraft and many instants and sorceries in it. Why so many instants and sorceries? Well, quite a few of the creatures of your Quandrix decks will come from your instants and sorceries. Especially your fractals will be cards that come from instants and sorceries, but also other ways of getting them. And that leads us to our last point. Fractals are a very significant part of a Quandrix deck. Sometimes your entire deck will be based around having as many or as big fractals as you can get, while at other times it will just be a minor part of your deck. So the advantages, to sum it up, of Quandrix is that you're a mid-range deck with pretty big creatures which can then fight very well, while using a lot of Magecraft and instants and sorceries. Anyway, let's go take a look at the best cards of Quandrix. So there they are then, the very best in class you could have for your Quandrix deck. We have first up the Mage Duel, a very good fight spell, the very best one you could have in your deck. It combines very well with every, of course, other instant and sorcery you're going to be playing in your Quandrix mid-range deck. As we already said, fighting is going to be one of your most common ways of interacting with your opponent's cards. And because you are a mid-range deck, there's a very good chance that the fight will be beneficial for you, but Mage Duel itself helps in that regard as well. Next up, we have the Needlethorn Drake. It is one of your, well, few 2-drop creatures you would really like to play in your Quandrix deck, apart from some of the uncommon cards. So in a way, you could say that Needlethorn Drake is the only reliable 2-drop you could get in every single draft where you're playing Quandrix. It, having flying and death touch, means it can just about block anything you would like and come out well. If not on top, then at least even. Needlethorn Drake will quite often make sure that your opponent doesn't want to or sort of cannot attack with creatures which are very expensive. They, of course, don't really feel like trading their 5 or 6 mana card for just your 2-drop. This 2-drop really makes sure that you can get to your mid-range cards, which will hopefully be much bigger than your opponent's. Speaking of mid-range cards, the Quandrix Pledge Mage. It, as well, combines very well with every instant and sorcery you're going to play in your deck, of course, because it has Magecraft. And Quandrix Pledge Mage really is one of the reasons why a Quandrix deck can have 12 or maybe even more instants and sorcery in it. You shouldn't be all too surprised if by the end of a game, the Quandrix Pledge Mage will be a 5/5 or maybe even bigger. One thing to remember though is that a Quandrix Pledge Mage is not very good on turn 3 and 4, that is to say, it's good to play it those turns, but it will very likely not be a good blocker. Quandrix Pledge Mage combines extremely well with your instants and sorceries that also learn. The instant or sorcery originally you cast will, of course, give a +1/+1 counter to the Pledge Mage, but your learn cards will always be sorceries, which means that just by casting an instant or sorcery that also learns, you can grow the Quandrix Pledge Mage to a 4/4. One of such examples is the Field Trip. It's somewhat a given in a draft deck that you will get your land 1, land 2, and land 3, but you will often find that the 4th land is not that guaranteed. Field Trip really makes sure that you can go from 3 to 4, or in very many cases from 3 to 5 or 6. I want you to think about the following, and that is that if you're really just searching for more lands, so you're playing your Field Trip on turn 3 because you have no other land drops, and you really need to get to 5 or 6 mana, it's quite often a good idea to, instead of learn, just discard a card from your hand and draw a new card. Field trip is also one of the ways of making sure that you can get to your late game cards, which you will very likely have in your Quandrix deck. Those late game cards being either card advantage or just very big creatures. Next up we have the Arcane Subtraction, a card which very much should not be overlooked. It combines well with many of the cards we have on this list. Needlethorn Drake, of course, is one of those prime examples where it combines very well. If you have a Needlethorn Drake, your opponent will likely want to attack with smaller creatures, forcing you into a Needlethorn Drake block so that their larger creatures can get reactivated again. But if you have the Arcane Subtraction, you can make sure that their smaller creature goes to 0 or negative attack, making sure that your Needlethorn Drake kills their creatures. Arcane Subtraction also combines very well with the Mage Duel. In a way, you can make sure that an enemy creature becomes very small. Then play the Mage Duel for 1 mana, and then in that way you can, for 3 mana, win a fight while also getting a learn card from your sideboard. Last up we have Burying Books. This card doesn't necessarily combine especially well with the other cards of the Quandrix deck, but it's just a card that is very strong all by itself. It's one of the few ways a Quandrix deck can interact with their very strongest creatures on the opponent's side, if your fights are not sufficient. There's also one other thing, that is that the very biggest creatures in this format are, strangely enough, almost always creature tokens. And creature tokens, when they get bounced, even if they get bounced to the deck, get destroyed. This means that Burying Books is a very good way of destroying the very biggest creatures in the format, permanently. Let's next up take a look at the most important lessons you should be picking up in your Quandrix deck. So here we have them, all the most preferred lessons you could have for your Quandrix deck. The interesting thing about these lessons is that not every single one of them is going to be equally strong in every different variation of a Quandrix deck you can have. There are 3 major variations of a Quandrix deck you could be building. There's the Fractal deck, so in that situation you will need a Fractal summoning most of all the lessons. Then we have the different variation of Quandrix that really goes for having many lands in play, so 8 or more. And in that variation of the deck it could be very beneficial to have the environmental sciences. Especially if you go field trip, find an environmental sciences from my sideboard, you will increase the amount of lands you have in play by quite a bit. And we have the Introduction to Prophecy. This card will be the best card to get if you're more in the Magecrafty variation of the Quandrix deck. There are a few uncommons and of course commons, the Quandrix Apprentice mostly, and the Quandrix Splash Mage mostly, which really care about you casting an instant or sorcery every turn, or sometimes even more than once a turn. And last up we have the Containment Breach. This is one of those lessons which I think is extremely strong to have access to, especially if your deck is already kind of okay. Why is the Containment Breach so good to have? Well, some of the most bomby rares of the format are artifacts and enchantments. So we have the Sparring Regimen, we have the Poet's Quill, and of course we have the Dramatic Finale. All 3 of these are enchantments or artifacts that if you can deal with them, especially if you can deal with them with every learn card you find, is very good to have. But in summary, you want the Fractal Summoning in your Fractal Quandrix deck, you want the Environmental Sciences in your 8 Lands Matters Quandrix deck, you want the Introduction to Prophecy in your Magecraft Quandrix deck, and you want the Containment Breach more or less always. Last up, to summarize, there are 3 variations of a Quandrix deck you can be drafting. It's a Magecraft variation, an 8-land variation, or a Fractal variation. In the Magecraft variation you will be liking these commons and uncommons a lot more than in the other versions, mostly because you have cards that say Magecraft and you have cards that are instants or sorceries that learn. Then in the 8-land deck you will like cards that find lands from your deck or benefit from having 8 or more lands in play, so that are these cards. And the Fractal variation is centered around cards that build fractals, of course, and cards that enable the strength of the fractals. So that's cards that put cards in graveyards, for instance these, and just the common that says your fractals get stronger, the Biomancer. I very much hope that this video helps you in drafting better Quandrix decks, and if you liked the video, please give us a like, and if you want to see more videos about Magic the Gathering, don't forget to subscribe, because you can already find videos about the other colleges on this channel, and soon the other colleges which have not yet been released will be added to this channel. I hope you'll have a lot of fun with Quandrix. I hope this video helped you a little bit, and I also hope to be seeing you around.